I would very much like to be there learning from you and learning with you. Also, I know there's a lot of enthusiasm and energy in that room because I know both Lawson Bryan and Daphne Johnston, and they exude energy, enthusiasm, and passion. And I would like to be there to capture some of that, as I'm sure you do as well, because you are involved in such a vital, important ministry. Yes, my wife was diagnosed with frontal temporal dementia in 2009. And as a result of that, everything began to change. And you know this because you relate to people living with dementia. Dementia affects every area of our lives. We know it affects us financially. We know it affects us medically. We know it affects our relationships. It affects often where we move. We moved out of Durham to be near our family. It affected my vocation. My vocation changed to that of caregiver rather than a seminary teacher. But one area that we don't talk as much about, but is at the heart of what the church offers people living with dementia, is the whole spiritual impact of dementia. And I would like to simply read to you, as Linda and I went through that journey. She died in 2019 after a 10 to 12-year journey with the diseases. And I kind of kept a record of some of her comments. I just want to read some of these comments to you. Immediately upon leaving the doctor's office when she had been diagnosed at the Duke Medical Center, Linda said, "Please don't tell anybody." Throughout the journey, she would often say, "I'm losing my mind. I can't do anything." Or, "I'm stupid. I'm not worth anything. I'm scared. I don't want to be a burden to you. I want to go home when we were at home. I don't belong anywhere." And then came that haunting question, "Who are you?" And then an unexpected question from a Christian educator, "Who is Jesus?" And then that whisper, "I'm going to die." Have you heard those expressions from those with whom you relate? Well, they reflect the deepest longings and needs of people living with dementia and those who love and care for them. And the primary means by which we view dementia in our society, the medical lens, has no answer for any of those needs. Those are spiritual needs. They go to the very heart of our identity, our relationships, our sense of meaning. Those expressions reflect the losses of dementia. The medical lens primarily deals with symptoms. Now, I value the medical lens and advocate on behalf of more insight from our medical professions and advocate for more research. But the medical lens focuses on symptoms, and all of the symptoms are losses. Hence, there should be no doubt or question as to why dementia becomes the most feared of all diseases. Well, I want to suggest that we in the faith community offer a different lens, and that is that we are not a collection or a constellation of symptoms, we are stories, and we participate in a transcendent story, and that is the story of God's redemptive, creative, reconciling, redeeming, and hope-filled action in the world. So what I think we have to offer in faith communities is that broader lens, valuing the medical lens, certainly, which is themselves, the medical field is a gift from God, but the lens of God's story. And I would like to spend just a few minutes talking about how we are participants in that broader story and what that means in our relationship with people living with dementia. For it is in that story that we find our identity, our sense of worth, our meaning, our purpose, our community, and our hope. All of those expressions that Linda gave are expressions of those lost sense of worth and identity, that longing for a sense of worth and meaning. And in the story of God's own creation, and the story of God is the one who brings creation into being out of God's love for creation. And it is in creation that we find our identity and worth. Our worth lies in that we are created out of God's love. We are made in the image of God, and God's love sustains us in all our being. So therein lies our identity. But we live in a society that tends to define us in terms of our capacities, that we are our abilities to think. We've bought into the Cartesian notion, I think, therefore I am. And therefore, if my thinking diminishes, then I diminish. But we are more than our capacities to think, our capacities to do, our capacity to know. We are beloved children of God. So our identity lies in the one to whom we belong, not in what we can do or what we know or what we produce or what we own. Our identity and our worth lies in the one to whom we belong, and we belong to the one who creates out of love, sustains us in love, and forms us toward the fulfillment of love in our lives. One of my volunteer responsibilities is I serve as the volunteer chaplain at a memory unit in the retirement community where I live. And one of the illustrations I sometimes use with them, and I've heard these same expressions as I've been present with them in the memory unit, but I carry with me very often. I carry this with me. Can you see it? It's a pocket knife. But if you look closely, you see the handle is off on one side. It's hard to open. It doesn't open very easily. The blade's rusty. So it doesn't cut, by the way. So I'll often ask the residents, would anybody like to buy this knife? And someone will say, well, no, I don't want that knife. It's not worth anything. And my response is, well, you don't have enough money to buy that knife. That knife is very valuable to me. Now, why would it be valuable to me? I ask. And invariably, one of the residents will say, I bet it was your father's. And my response will be, no, it was my grandfather's. I carry this to remind me who I am and some of my story, but I also carry it to remind me that the value of this knife lies in the one to whom it belonged and the story associated with it. And that is precisely where our value lies. Even though our finish may be falling off, even though our joints may not work properly, even though our thinking it gets rusty, and even though we can't produce and do what we once did, it doesn't matter. Our identity, our worth lies in the one to whom we belong. And we are beloved children of God, made in the divine image. The text is from 1 John chapter 3, 1 and 2. Beloved, see what love the Father has for us, that we should be called children of God. Beloved, that is who we are now. We are God's children now. It does not yet appear what we shall be, but when he appears, we shall be like him. Our identity, our worth lies in our relationship with God and with one another. So that is a broader lens. Our identity is not in our capacities. We're all going to lose our capacities at various stages of our lives and eventually lose everything. But except our identity and relationship with a God from whose love we can never be separated. So that's one broadening of the lens. Not our capacities, our stories, and our participation in God's story. And another part of that lens is that God, this God who creates out of love, this God who brings the whole of creation into being, has chosen to come among us in vulnerability and weakness, and thereby redeeming our weakness and vulnerability. It is significant that we recognize that God chose to come as a helpless, dependent little baby born among the homeless of an unwed teenage mother, spent the first 2 years of his life as an immigrant, fleeing slaughter. That is who God is. God comes in vulnerability. Do you think Jesus was any less the Son of God when he was having his diaper changed by Mary or nursing at her breast than when he was hanging on the cross or when he was teaching at the Sermon on the Mount? No, he was the Son of God, the Savior of the world, as an infant, drawing forth Mary's love, Mary's ability to respond to the love of God. He was expanding Mary's capacity to love. And you know, as well as I, as you deal with people living with dementia, that they expand our capacity to love without reciprocity. Linda greatly expanded my ability to love, because even when she could not return the love in the way that she normally would, in receiving my love, she was expanding my love. And thereby we were both participating in the flow of God's love. And that is our very reason for being. God created us out of love to be a channel of that love to one another and to the whole of creation. And God chooses to come to us in the midst of our vulnerability, our weakness. Now, it has enormous implications for our living with dementia. One thing it says is, even in our vulnerability, we are still beloved by God. We are still made in the divine image. We are still there. We are still a person. It also means that those who are living with dementia, those with whom you volunteer or professionally care for, they are means of grace to you. They are means by which you grow. I have often said that I would not wish the 10-year, 12-year journey with Linda on anyone, but neither would I take anything for those 10 to 12 years. For I believe I grew more in my own capacity to love. I grew more in, I've got a long ways to go, but I grew more in the fruits of the Spirit in those 10 years than any other decade of my life. Because in receiving my love, Linda was enabling me to grow in love. And you know, love is a dance. Now I can't dance, so I'm hesitant to use this as an illustration. Linda reminded me I couldn't dance several times. But sometimes in dance, you lead, sometimes you follow, and sometimes you lift your partner. You see, we are called to bear one another's burdens, and in so doing, fulfill the way of Christ. That's the way of love. And therefore, to bear one another's burdens or to dance, one is leading, one is following. And sometimes in the process of participating in this divine dance, the one receiving love is expressing love by receiving it. Does that make sense? Linda loved me when she could no longer express her love in the ways of helping me or doing anything for me. She loved me by letting me care for her. And in that caring for her, we were both participating in the triune God's dance of love. And we were adding to the flow of that river of love flowing from the throne of God. And our basic purpose is to participate in that flow. The prayer that I begin each day with is that God will deliver me from undue self-preoccupation so that your love, God, can flow into and through me in everything I do this day. As we participate in caring for one another, we are participating in this divine flow of love. And that's our reason for being. It is that which gives us meaning and purpose. So the incarnation, creation, incarnation, and God also, part of God's story is that God is forever incorporating us into a new family, a new community. The God who comes to us in vulnerability calls us into community, and we are incorporated into that community through our baptism. And in that community, it's a different community than that of the world. It's a community in which those on the margins, as John Swinton says, those on the margins become the center of the community's life. So that people who are living with dementia, who are among the most marginalized in our society, are not peripheral to the congregation's life and ministry or to the church's life. They are central to its life. And you have experienced that in your congregations, I'm sure, as you've participated in respite ministries. It helps the whole congregation come alive. Paul expressed it in 1 Corinthians 1, that God has chosen the foolish to confound the wise. God has chosen the weak to confound the strong. You see, those who are those in their vulnerability, are the means of God's presence and grace to us. They become means of our own being blessed and our own growth in discipleship. They are not objects of our charity. I often suggest to folks who are engaging in or want to engage in ministries with people living with dementia, please don't make them your project. I grew up in poverty in Appalachian Mountains. I know what it feels like to be somebody's project. It's not a form of affirming dignity. It's a form of, well, it dehumanizes further. People living with dementia do not need to be our projects. They are our teachers. They are our means of grace. They come to us. We don't take God to them. They become God's presence to us. Or in the relationship, we share God's presence with one another. And that is the essence of our community. And that means that we must receive their gifts. You have, I'm sure, as you participate in the activities with people in Respite, you recognize they have abundant gifts to give. And they therefore often sense and help one another. I know when I was visiting Linda in the memory unit at one point, she had gotten to the point where she hardly recognized me. And I sometimes was somewhat paranoid and afraid I was trying to hurt her and therefore resisted my presence, which was the most difficult part of the journey. But I went over to visit her one day and I couldn't find her. And I walked up the hallway and went into one of the rooms. And there she was, standing beside the bed of a man in the unit who had the same diagnosed disease, frontal temporal. And he was very difficult to manage. But he wasn't feeling well, and he was lying in the bed. And Linda was leaning over him, stroking his shoulder, and said, "I love you. I love you." She was reaching him in ways I could never reach him. She was ministering to him in ways that the staff couldn't minister. She somehow sensed, I think, her kinship with him. So we are incorporated into this community of mutuality, where we are all participating in this divine triune God's dance of love, and where we are receiving and giving and sharing one another's gifts. And John Swinton does remind us, and I know Daphne has been privileged to sit at the feet of John Swinton and to talk with him personally, premier pastoral theologian, especially with a focus on dementia. But that he emphasizes that Jesus didn't go to the margins. Jesus made those on the margins central to his ministry and his relationships. He went to the outcasts. Well, I think that's where we as congregations have the opportunity to incorporate these people who are forgotten often by the congregations. We have the opportunity to receive their gifts. And in so doing, we are being transformed as individuals and as a community. During the final stages of Linda's disease, by the way, she was in the memory unit for 18 months, but she didn't adjust to the memory care facility well. She was an introvert by nature, and valued her privacy. And you know there is no privacy in such facilities. She lost weight, but lost 25 pounds in a very short time. Well, she was evaluated and placed on hospice. And after being in the unit for about 18 months, she lost her ability to feed herself. She forgot how to feed herself. So she forgot how to do that. And since it was assisted living, she had to be placed either in skilled nursing or I would bring her home. I asked the nurse practitioner who had been providing care for her for the whole duration of her illness here. And I asked, well, what would be your prognosis? And she said, I think she probably has 6 months to a year. And I said, well, I think then I'll take her home. I'd rather have her home with me. So we brought her home. I'm in the room where her bed was. She could still walk, but it was very unstable. So I brought her home. She regained her weight. She began to respond more positively. And after about a year, she was home, by the way. She was on hospice care for 42 months. She was home for 3 years. And after a year, the nurse practitioner in one of her routine visits said, I am so surprised that Linda is still with us. And I said, well, what do you think accounts for that? And she said, and I quote, and I may tear up as I quote it, she's been loved to life. She was surrounded by, I had caregivers, but our family, we loved her. She loved us. Even though there were few of those opportunities to enjoy the things we had enjoyed all our lives, I learned to appreciate the simple things. And they are all simple acts or simple expressions of love. A kind of a twinkle in her eye that may be fleeting. Sometimes she even flirted with me in her eyes. A faint smile, a slight squeeze of the hand. And, you know, intimacy took on new meaning. Intimacy was expressed in those simple acts of love. And I miss the opportunity to do that. I miss brushing her hair or stroking her face, cleaning her teeth, feeding her favorite ice cream, which was mint chocolate chip. It was the last thing she ate before she died. Those simple acts of love. In so doing, we were participating in God's love. And I long for those times again. Well, shortly after that, I shared with a friend of mine, Carl Netting, who is a is a retired hospice chaplain, worked for the Mayo Clinic and for other institutions, but Carl's been a longtime friend. And I was sharing with him what the nurse practitioner had said. And Carl used an image that has stayed with me all of these subsequent years. He says, well, you and the family and the caregivers and those who were present with her were creating a womb of love so that she can be birthed into a new world. Is that not what we in the faith communities have to offer? Is that not, that might be a good mission of the church. We are creating wombs of love in which people are being birthed into abundant life. The abundant life that is made possible by the God who brings us into being, who comes present with us, and who is ever bringing us into community and moving us toward a new heaven and a new earth, moving us toward this healed community where God wipes away every tear from our eyes and death and sorrow are no more. And you know, the most profound theological word by my friend Sam Wells says is the preposition with. God with us. But being with one another in love is the theological spiritual lens through which we in faith communities can relate to people living with dementia, so that those haunting words don't tell anybody. We remove the stigma that results in such words. I can't do anything. No, you don't have to do anything. Just be. I'm not worth anything. Oh, you are created by God in the image of God with infinite worth and dignity. I'm scared. I'm with you. I don't want to be a burden. You're never a burden. Some of the tasks may be burdensome, but you are never a burden. You are a means of grace. I don't belong anywhere. Oh, you belong in this community that God is bringing into being. Who are you? I am one who loves you. Who is Jesus? He's the very presence of God. I'm going to die. Nothing in all creation is able to separate us from the love of God. Knowledge passes away, memories fade, but love remains. We provide a lens through which people who are living with dementia are blessed and are a blessing to us. May it be so. Thank you.